Hello everyone and welcome back to Pass the Aux Cord. I'm your host,
Hidden Creature.
and there has been a lot of talk about a recession as of lately. We've got our recession indicator memes and things like that. Lots of things in the meme world and the real world. But one of the biggest things that keeps coming up is the idea of recession pop coming back. The housing crisis that happened in 2007 caused a certain era to occur in pop music where things were very carefree, upbeat, talking about tonight being the last night ever, so we're gonna party hard. A certain especially electronic leaning style of production. Big explosive hooks, which of course is always characteristic of pop, but never before seen to such levels. We're going to see that this actually extends longer than the recession itself, given that that typically is marked at about 2009, but trends are trends, and before they die out completely, they waver and stick around a little bit. Recession era pop is a thing that a lot of people my age at currently 23 have a ton of nostalgia for very good reason. We have so many nice and nostalgic memories attached to this era of music, but is it any good? That's something we're going to be exploring today, and naturally, some of it is going to be better than others. We're going to be taking a look at, of course, so much of the 2007 to 2011 to 12 era of recession pop, but we're also going to be covering the recession pop era coming back to us as we enter a new recession. Naturally, since there's a lot of similarities, we're going to have to see how what we're dealing with right now stacks up. But to start off the older era, we're going to start it off very strong with one of the most iconic albums in this category. That, of course, is Lady Gaga, The Fame Monster. And it is one with some of the most iconic songs on it. While it's technically an EP and one of the shortest projects we'll talk about, it goes 6 for 8 with generational bangers. Bad Romance, Alejandro, Monster, and Telephone are some of the biggest and best songs for pop in this era, of course. Telephone is my personal favorite, and the Beyonce crossover was incredible. The only flaws are Speechless being sort of a sleepy or bland song, and Teeth hardly even feeling like a complete song by the time it's over. Worth mentioning, Gaga says vamp multiple times on this album. I'm not saying she predicted Playboi Carti's Whole Lotta Red, but I might be saying that. The Fame and Born This Way also feel like recession pop essential albums, but I limited to one per artist per era. We will get to Mayhem later because it is part of the new era. Even though it has Paparazzi and Poker Face, The Fame was just a bit less of a hit parade, and Born This Way is really pushing the time period, being released in 2011, where this one is right at the right time. So yeah, this is going to be an easy S. One of the easiest S's of the day. Now, next up here, we got Black Eyed Peas, The End. When considering the topic of recession pop, Lady Gaga is probably the first and most relevant artist, but Black Eyed Peas are potentially the second to come to mind. Their 2009 album The End, or the E.N.D, depending on how we want to pronounce it, has got to be the best example of why they come to mind so quickly. To start, I think it's a very important note to mention that just about anyone 20 years or older right now has some sort of positive memory associated with I Got a Feeling. It's a bit corny, sure, but it's absolutely an undeniable track, and it's easily one of the most effective we'll talk about today. That being said, let's talk about the shit show clusterfuck that is the rest of this 67 ungodly minutes of music. Let's start with one that oddly gets defended enough, that being the opener, Boom Boom Pow, a song that clearly should have been called Boom Boom Boom. I mean, listen to the chorus. And the chorus is the only thing it's really got going for it. We've got annoying, over-processed rap versus a terrible attempt at rapping from Fergie, and some of the most unintentionally funny instrumental breaks put to music ever. I love, in the most ironic way possible, Fergie loudly proclaiming, "will.i.am, drop the beat now," before the goofiest sounding beat drop ever. And will.i.am shouting, "I be rocking them beats," with full auto-tune over the top of it.
I be rocking them beats. I be rocking them beats.
The radio edit is probably the only version that almost everyone knows and remembers, and that's to their benefit, because it's basically the same thing that happens at the end with a similar instrumental break. This time without the announcement and the yelling, this song just descends into penis music madness before closing off. The next big single is I'm a Bee, which is a lot simpler but a lot more offensive, if anything, at a surface glance, including one of the most annoying hooks in existence and managing to fail at both being an electronic track and a hip-hop track, and is corny in just about every conceivable way. The remaining singles are Rock That Body, Meet Me Halfway, Alive, and Missing You. Honestly, they're fine. Even if there's nothing to write home about, my favorite of the four is Rock That Body, even though the sample carries a bit. However, if we look at the track list, we've run out a single 7 tracks in, and there's almost an entire album's worth of runtime remaining. If you look at the second half of the End as its own album, it is a truly awful and abominable album. We see what's potentially the most annoying chorus I have ever heard with Ring-a-Ling, Fergie essentially doing a reggae cosplay with Electric City, and the Recession pop angle being taken very literally with Now Generation, which becomes one of the album's silliest, goofiest sounding instrumentals very quickly. Anti-consumerism also heavily comes in the themes on this song in such a damn corny way, especially considering that this album is objectively very commercialized. I'm not even really sure what they were thinking there, trying to make people who bought the CD feel bad, I guess. If this was an EP that was the same length as the Gaga record we just talked about, I'd be fine with it despite not liking it. But with it being well over double that, this is pretty insufferable. Unless you manage to turn your brain off all the way. And I understand that turning your brain off is somewhat necessary here, but not to this degree. Yeah, this is going in D. I'm sorry, dude. I don't even like most of the big singles, and they run out very quickly. So now we've pretty much got the hot take out of the way. Let's move on to something that I feel somewhat similarly about, but it isn't really a hot take. That being LMFAO, Sorry for Party Rocking. I really debated on which LMFAO album to include because Party Rock feels like the right one because it's much more in the right time period and just look at it, I guess, but tracks 2, 3, and 4 on this album, Sorry for Party Rocking, are easily the duo's most iconic songs, and the most iconic song on Party Rock is Shots, which we're gonna get into later. Eventually, I decided that you can't have this list if you don't have Party Rock Anthem, the semi-title track to this. Or, for that matter, the actual title track, Sorry for Party Rocking. Everyone remembers Sorry for Party Rocking, Party Rock Anthem, and Sexy and I Know It, and while they're super goofy, dumb, fun types of songs, they always were, and I think that's what we love them for. And I'd argue, in that way, they didn't even age that bad. They're still very listenable to this day, and pretty well produced. But once you get into the second half of this album, a reoccurring trend that we'll see, things get a little different, and it feels like nobody even listened to these ones. Did you know that LMFAO and Busta Rhymes had a song together? I sure didn't, and it is absolutely ridiculous.
Every single thing I spit on, you know what a scorch with some of my diamond shit.
While the back half is entirely emblematic of the era, given the electropop production, heavy autotune, constant themes of partying all night, etc., it is also some of the most tacky and generic examples of it, especially considering this was pretty late along in the wave with a 2011 release. There's also a song on the deluxe called Hot Dog, which is seemingly just a song about eating a hot dog, so that's kind of insane. As well on the deluxe, there's a track called Party Rock Anthem, Party Rock Anthem. Yep, 2 times, because one wasn't enough, I guess, and it's... Wow.
Party rock.
This is... This is... S tier. S tier for the party. Get it up there. S tier. Kesha. Animal. This album, and to an extent the Cannibal EP that was paired with it, of course, is one of the most iconic albums of this era as well. Your Love Is My Drug, Take It Off, and especially TikTok were some of the most inescapable songs of the year they came out, and they're all bangers, with TikTok especially being fondly remembered today. Unfortunately, TikTok might, however, be the worst aged song I've ever heard, other than maybe Pregnant by P. Diddy and R. Kelly, but even then, the latter of the two notoriously gets a shout out on this song, and sort of a cameo as well in the very beginning of the track.
Wake up in the morning feeling like P. Diddy.
Which has led Kesha to start changing the lyrics when performing the song for obvious reasons. There's also the fact that there's kinda a line about sexual harassment on the song, but the song was produced by Dr. Luke of all people. Since we're going at it with a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses feel for this video, we won't get too much into the Dr. Luke stuff, but we can all recognize, surely, that that's a bit ironic. And of course, there's the fact that this song now looks like a billboard for a social media app that didn't even exist when the song was released, and the title is even spelt the same way. If you're too young, you wouldn't have any idea there's no correlation. While TikTok has aged poorly, but is still a good song, you can say the same and sometimes worse about the rest of the album. For one, it's mixed and produced atrociously more oftentimes than not, which is especially noticeable on the song that features 303, who we'll have some choice words for later in the video. And there are also some songs with completely ridiculous concepts, such as Dinosaur, which might be the most annoying song we talk about today. Written about getting hit on by old guys, I guess, with a spelling chorus that is entirely dated and corny. Or there's also Stefan, which is a song for a guy named Stefan, which feels like such an anticlimactic name for that topic. Nothing against the name Stefan, but it's certainly no Alejandro. It also sounds more like she's saying Steven in the song, so I'm not sure what's up with that. So yeah, this album is ridiculously tacky, and honestly, the writers, producers, etc. are more to blame than Kesha is by far, but it still stands. However, honestly, that's kind of the name of the game today for this type of music, and it succeeds in being fun, turn your brain off types of music that would have been great for partying to at the time. It's effective for what it is, usually, but you definitely won't catch me bumping most of the deep cuts, which of course land on the back half of the album exclusively, with all of the singles being right at the start of it. It'd definitely be a little bit blasphemous for me to put Kesha all the way down at the bottom of the list, especially since it might be a bit disingenuous. I feel like Cannibal might be a better project, but I can't really give this more credit than a C, just because once you get past the first few tracks, it's just not good. But talking about those choice words for 303, Streets of Gold is next up.
With the show, if you want me, I won't say no. Touching on my...
You may have thought we got as dumb as you possibly could ever get with LMFAO, but I got news for you. Honestly, you might have been right, but 303 are a close second if nothing else. 303 are a weird one because they're almost more of a MySpace thing than a Recession pop thing, but this album was released after MySpace's heyday and it still had some success to some extent. It also perfectly implements the carefree attitudes, catchy, over-the-top choruses, etc., so it landed on this list. MySpace era video might be fun too, so if we want to go back to that era instead of Recession pop for a different tier list type video like this one, let me know in the comments. I would love to do that, even though listening to a lot of the music would be torture. Regardless, if you've somehow managed to go your whole life dodging 303 so far, they're basically what would happen if The Lonely Island was completely unironic and not just making parody songs. Tracks like House Party and My First Kiss, which notably has a Kesha feature, we've got a little bit of a crossover back to back here, read so much like parody in the modern age, but from what I understand, these guys really were serious about that party life and went hard enough on all of this to make some of the dumbest sounding songs ever. And you know what's fucked up? I kind of fuck with it. It's ironically, I guess, but I kind of fuck with it sometimes, and I hate that. The whole concept of touching on my is stupid as hell, and the little beeps within the instrumental acting as sort of a censor is kind of a dumb concept, but why is it such a vibe? And calling back to My First Kiss again, it is so cringe as the song gets started, no doubt about that, but once it gets going a little bit longer, things get on a roll. I'd be lying if I said I'm not vibing at least a little. Where I'll 100% agree with the negative consensus is the slow songs, which are properly abhorrent. R.I.P. is so juvenile and cringe that it makes me very glad I got into Hollywood Undead instead of 303 as a kid. And if that doesn't tell you a lot, I don't know what will. This band is sort of a jack of all trades, or maybe a 10 of all trades, I guess. Jacks are good and 10s are bad usually, right? Anyways, they do a lot. We've got rapping, we've got EDM drops, we've got anthemic choruses, we've got getting fucked up all night, tomorrow night, and the night after. And really, it's all you could ask for. They are also the reason that Lil Jon and Kesha have only 1 degree of separation within this weird little cinematic universe we're building up here. So even if this is objectively ass, we gotta give them some credit in that regard. I feel like it'd be some sort of a sin to put them up at C tier considering some of what I've already put there, so we're gonna put them at D. Regardless of how much of a banger Touchin' On My is. Next up, weird one here, but Skrillex Bangarang. Say what you will about including a bro step album on here, but if LMFAO qualifies, this does too, I'm sorry. Find me a guy who liked Party Rock Anthem but didn't like Bangarang, and I'll find you $1 billion because that guy does not exist. Say the same, but think of where you could play the two of these albums and those songs. While the music is very different, the demographic and setting, and to some degree the ethos, even though there's no lyrics here, is identical. So then let's talk about early Skrillex and how it is oddly maybe the most nostalgic music ever for people my age right now, if you fell into a particular niche. Naturally, the biggest reason this project lands on here is its title track. Between Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites and Bangarang, it feels like so many people got their first taste of electronic music that is purely electronic from Skrillex. Outside of being a very solid, very fun piece of electronic music that most people liked at the time, it was also a big part of why there was sort of a subculture of the weird kid that listens to dubstep for the years that followed. Brostep has naturally aged pretty fucked, and this Skrillex project is not exactly a huge exception, but honestly, this still sounds just as good as it did day one at an objective level at the same time. Beyond the iconic title track, the first 3 tracks alone prove this is worth a listen. Right in the downright cinematic opening, And as an odd collab as it is, Breaking a Sweat featuring The Doors is an absolute banger. It samples both Light My Fire and a Jim Morrison 1969 interview, and does so to strangely immaculate results. It's hard to deny that The Devil's Den shows a bit of the obnoxious and stutteringly loud side of dubstep, and that Right on Time shows the repetitive, annoying side of dubstep, but both tracks are still tolerable. That then leads us into Kyoto, and that is somehow one of 3 fucking awesome songs I've heard called Kyoto. This is this type of music at its best right here, truly. The closer, Summit, with Ellie Goulding, isn't even half bad either, honestly, so with it being a short project, technically an EP again, that covers everything, there's a minimum 5 good songs, 7 on here, I'd argue. The deluxe also has an orchestral rendition of some of Skrillex's work, and that's a fucking hilarious concept to me, so that's kind of awesome. Fuck it, dude. Bias, 100%. I'm willing to admit that, but A tier. And next up, moving on to something so entirely different that I question, again, if Skrillex should have been here. Selena Gomez and The Scene, A Year Without Rain.
Going round and round, we're never gonna stop. Going round and round.
In 2009, Disney Channel's own and apparently current billionaire, however that happened, made the dreaded actor-to-musician transition, with her band going as The Scene. While this is the second Selena Gomez and The Scene album, it's the first one I really remember having a big push and backing behind it. I watched a lot of Disney Channel growing up, and it seems like Round and Round, the music video for it at least, played between almost every single episode of Disney Channel sitcoms. That song is the opener, front-loaded track list again, and that's just as you'd expect, but it still kind of holds up. It's catchy. It's nice. This album is, as you'd expect, a 2010 pop album that sounds very 2010, but it's not always in a bad way. When they aren't drowning her in super heavy autotune like on Spotlight, Selena is also a good singer, and even if it's way too clean and polished, these songs work as pretty fun party bangers if you want to put them like that. This album is also an example of the very teen-focused end of this era, especially with being a Disney Channel star leading the project. Selena was 16 here, and this album was meant to appeal to a demographic around her age, maybe a bit younger. Nonetheless, it is made for somewhat pretty alright listen even today, all things considered, even if it isn't very memorable. Selena Gomez is probably not the first person that comes to mind when exploring that concept though, so let's talk about who is. But first, C tier on this. Alright, the time is now Justin Bieber, My World 2.0. Unlike Selena, Justin Bieber had much more humble beginnings, not blowing up off of Disney Channel fame, but blowing up on YouTube, being a YouTube musician technically, which isn't something that's exactly gained the most positive reputation. And if we go by this era of Justin Bieber especially, it wasn't really all that well accepted then either. At the time of its release, it feels like everyone was talking about Baby being the most annoying song ever created. It's to the degree that for a long time, the music video was one of the most disliked videos on the entire YouTube platform, and was the most disliked for a little while there. Considering he'd go on to create Yummy, and considering a lot of the other shit discussed in this video, that was a bit unfair, no doubt about it. It's not like it was without its fans, the song that is, but the general public hating Justin so much was unjust. The ludicrous feature was very funny though. What a time to be alive. What's especially strange looking back is that Baby isn't even the worst song by a long shot on My World 2.0, and what we have here is yet another instance of the best tracks being right at the start. The other and most notable song, however, is Eeny Meeny, and that one does land a little bit later, so I'll give it that. But I won't really give it that that is a good song by any means. and the Sean Kingston feature on it is an even more unintentionally funny one than the ludicrous one on the previous track we discussed. Considering that Justin was a child here, the lyrics are obviously referencing a common children's rhyme, and that Sean Kingston and Justin Bieber are seemingly interested in the same girl on this song, and considering that Sean Kingston was about 23, I think, the vibes are fucking strange to say the least. It's the only song that's not available on streaming from this album, and I have to wonder if the reason is just how weird it all looks in retrospect. Otherwise, it's particularly odd how dated so much of this sounds too, even for its time. My best guess is the goal was to play off a bit of an NSYNC or Boys to Men thing, but Jesus, let the 90s handle that, please. I can absolutely get why you would be 12 to maybe 16 in 2010 and be really into this. This would be your jam, but in today's context, this is not it. While I personally, at least now, don't even mind Baby that much, people would still tell you it is one of the worst songs, and I would actually argue it is the best here. So that tells you what you need to know about the rest of it. And even then, the rest of the album is just bland as hell, and that's mostly the issue with it. This was one of the only albums I got bored listening to for this entire video. D tier. D tier easy. Alright, are the Katy Cats gone? Hopefully. I mean, I doubt the attention span is really there, and hopefully if it is, they're more reasonable ones. Alright, everyone grab your torches and pitchforks, because it's time for me to talk about the first artist I ever actively disliked, Katy Perry.
Into the light. Kiss me, infect me with your love.
And that is due to one song especially that lands on here, Firework, which for a period of time when I was quite young was the most inescapable, but also, to me, the most annoying song out. I think what it really boils down to is the chorus, what's even meant by
Make him go, as you shoot across the
and why would anybody ever phrase it like that? Naturally, I can admit, it's a very catchy song, but to me it's always been catchy in the wrong ways, like Yummy by Justin Bieber is. There's something far too forced smile and childish about it. That being said, coming back to it, I can't really hate it as much as I once did, even if it's annoying music for annoying moms to me, but I can't deny there's a little bit of magic about it. It's remarkably well produced, which I can say about the entirety of this album actually. And immediately upon taking a look at the rest here, it's actually crazy how much of a hit parade this album is, and upon revisiting it, I have to admit to myself that there's absolutely a decent bit to love here. The first 3 tracks here alone, landing right before Firework at track 4, were insanely popular, and it's clear to see why. They're fun, party-ready bangers that are very of the time, but also make it very clear why they worked for their time. Last Friday Night is a song that also annoyed me a bit as a kid, but significantly less than Firework. I'm now at a point where I just have to admit that it's a ton of fun to listen to. Later on this album, there's another double punch of huge hits, those being E.T. and The One That Got Away. And E.T. is actually the only Katy Perry song I remember liking a bit at the time. It hasn't aged 100% elegantly, but I still like it a lot now as a whole. I remember this being on one of those, I think it was the Now That's What I Call Music CDs, a compilation of some sort nonetheless, and my friend's sister playing it, and me being like, yo, this kind of bangs, what is this song? And then being shocked and repulsed with myself that it was a Katy Perry song. The One That Got Away has sort of the same obnoxiously melodramatic thing as Firework going on, but I'd argue it works a lot more. So that absolute hit parade covers exactly half of the songs, and the remaining deep cuts are pretty hit or miss, but some really leave a lot to be desired. The worst track by far here is Peacock, and it is really the dinosaur equivalent to this album. It's significantly more annoying than everything else, downright obnoxious, and it is terrible at a lyric standpoint as well.
I wanna see you peacock, cock, cock, you peacock, cock, you peacock, cock, cock,
The rest of the songs are simply unmemorable, a bit boring at times, but competent. That all said, there's so many notable ones here, and they aren't even all right at the start of the album that I have to give this album quite a bit of props. As much as younger me would hate myself for this, I have to admit Katy Perry somewhat deserved to be as big as she was at the time, if nothing else than just for how damn well produced this album is. Katy Perry's persona is still a lot less likable to me than many of the artists we'll talk about today, but it still ended up making for some memorable and nice sounding songs at the end of the day. So that's gonna be a big old B tier for me, especially with Peacock dragging it down, unfortunately. Let's move on. And move on we shall with Pitbull starring in Rebelution. When looking at it with a retrospective lens, this might very well be the funniest album we talk about today, and that's immediately noticeable at first glance. With the title, he's of course doing the whole my life is a movie thing, very of the time, but also mashes together rebel and revolution, which is a pretty ironic choice of words to describe this album with. And of course, also on this cover, we have Pitbull standing next to a camouflage woman, I guess. This album looks how it sounds, I'll say that much. This is a weird one for the Recession pop list because Pitbull is, by definition, more of a rapper than a pop star, and the moments on here like Shut It Down and the Dope Ball interlude make it feel like he's really trying to prove that much. But at the same time, this album so well incorporates the themes and sonic ideas of Recession pop, and it really doesn't feel like you have Recession pop without him. He's a super notable candidate in the list. I also exclusively think of Pitbull as a pop artist, considering where he'd go later in his career with albums like Globalization and the songs he'd go on to create, both here and otherwise that were huge hits. But not only is the picture of Pitbull in my mind that of a pop star, it's one of an over-the-top, extravagant, goofy, type of oddly self-serious tone that makes for something very hard to take seriously, but ultimately pretty fun. There's no better place to hear that than this album's biggest hits, the biggest of which, I Know You Want Me, Kale Ocho, being one of his biggest hits all around and most well-known, and arguably his most well-liked. The second big standout in the positive is Hotel Room Service, which is a certified club banger classic, but an absolutely ridiculous one at that. There's something so dumb, but so fun about having a chorus that consists of like, was this a paid promotion for Holiday Inn or something? I don't know. Regardless, however it came to be, it fucking slaps. That then, however, leads us to the deep cuts, that of which there are many. And holy shit, it gets pretty rough in there. Girls has a notable Kesha appearance, which is usually uncredited from what I can tell, but it's the first of a few that has a tone to the lyrics that hasn't really aged that well and sounds remarkably tacky looking back at it. But following that, we have Full of Shit, which is contender for worst song I'll talk about all day today, and I know I've said that a lot, but like, seriously, listen to this. But at least it's funny bad. This song is absolutely ridiculous. I can tell that the attempt was to do a song that sounds like Hotel Room Service a little bit, something at least in that vein, but it fell on its face so hard. Later on the album we get Juice Box, which has the most wonderfully phrased chorus, that being, "That juice box wet, she keep that juice box juicy," which is just one in a list of lyrics so terrible, I could be here all day. When we finally get to the final track, Daddy's Little Girl, it's not much better, as this one is a slow, sappy, incredibly ill-fitting track in sound, but especially ill-fitting in the lyrics. It speaks to women who are victims of SA and various other struggles. That's a fine enough message, assuming you interpret everything here charitably, but pardon me for thinking,
for all the women that have been stripped of their innocence.
She was daddy's little girl.
but no matter what.
Is a bit jarring after there just being a chorus of just a few tracks prior. The slow and pseudo-inspirational track that comes right before, it fits a little bit better, I suppose, but it could have been a better closer. Not by much, though. It's a collaboration with Bob, and that kinda does make a lot of sense. But considering I've put way too much time and mental effort into talking about a Pitbull album, let's talk about Bob's album instead, and first move this right down into the D tier despite hotel room service.
Really use a wish right now, wish right now, wish right now.
Yeah, I could use a dream or a genie or a
So maybe this one feels even less fitting than Pitbull, and this is even more so a hip-hop album than a pop album. But come on now, look at this track list and tell me it does not belong in the Recession pop discussion. The main reason I even considered this album for a mention here was, of course, the wild crossover that was Airplanes with Hayley Williams. The catchy, carefree, uplifting vibe here feels very Recession pop, and it's one of the longest lasting, most iconic mainstream tracks that came out of 2010 easily, and one of the most fondly remembered songs from this entire era. However, when I started playing the album and Nothing on You with Bruno Mars started playing, it all came rushing back, making me know I had to include this album. I really wasn't expecting much from this album, considering the decade and a half that followed it looked like Bob experiencing bad album, terrible conspiracy theory, bad album, repeat, so on and so forth. But I tell you what, the smile on my face while listening to Nothing on You for the first time in years was enormous. This album is very competently produced as well, and doesn't sound very dated as a whole. For the most part, Bob's rapping is actually on point most of the time. He sounds pretty great here, and everything he does on it does too. As corny and ratitudical as the song might be in essence, Magic with Rivers Cuomo of Weezer is another classic that fits the bill on here. There's even a little bit of the crunk stuff that was so much a part of this whole overarching era. And you know what? I think it might be time to talk about a little bit more of that and pop this album into the B tier first. And moving right along, we got Lil Jon, Crunk Rock. So this is most easily the most aggressive thing on the list. Perhaps it feels a bit jarring to see a song about murder right next to Firework by Katy Perry, but I'm going to go with the Skrillex logic and tell you to think about the person who was a fan of this and where it was all played, and the actual ethos of the music as well. If nothing else, this is fun, turn-up, explosive, catchy, electronically influenced music that is meant for getting fucked up and partying all night. If we really play fast and loose with the definition, that's essentially what Recession pop is. And besides, we got the whole crew here on the feature list. Soulja Boy, who I really considered mentioning earlier, but eventually decided not to. Our boy, Mr. Worldwide, Dale, Pitbull. Not one, not two, but 3 LMFAO features, and R. Kelly as well. There's even 303 on here though, dude. It's like the fucking Avengers, but instead of fighting crime, it's making bullshit club music. Crunk Rock is a strange one in concept because crunk was a thing that existed for a while. After all, it's not like Lil Jon's start was during this era. He had multiple albums with the East Side Boys spanning back to the 90s. So you'd think this would take a more rock direction for the crunk stuff he was already making. But nah, it's only pop and electronic being added to the pre-existing formula. It also takes itself so seriously at times. There's an interlude where he's saying crunk rock is a whole-ass hardcore lifestyle, and then proceeds to have some of the goofiest sounding songs right afterwards. So yeah, it's hard to take crunk rock seriously to say the least, but taking things seriously isn't really the name of the game here, and honestly I'd rather not. We're here to have fun with catchy tracks, and that's exactly what Crunk Rock provides. Out of Your Mind is easily my favorite track on the album, and I've known it for quite a while now. Shout out to the mobile game BeatStar for putting me on game. The chorus goes so hard, and I legitimately love the LMFAO feature here.
Bitch, get out the way. I'm running over niggas like a runaway train.
On that same note, there's one of the other LMFAO features, Shots, which, as I mentioned, also appears on one of the LMFAO albums for some reason. I guess they just have joint custody of the song. But this is the one from the album that everybody knows, and it's got to be one of the best club songs that we'll talk about today. It goes ridiculously hard, but you don't need me to tell you that. You already know, and you probably had this thing as the ringtone on your Motorola Razr. Side note though, damn, the overall view of alcohol in society has massively changed. Imagine opening a song today with "Where My Alcoholics At." It's so funny how it all got phrased. Beyond that, we got highlights like Killas with The Game. Sure, makes sense. Ice Cube, of all people. And then Elephant Man and Whole Wheat Bread. Who the fuck? Anyways, it goes stupid hard, unreasonably so. I feel like we absolutely have to mention also specifically the Pitbull feature on Work It Out 2. It is so much fun. And really, the album in general is so much fun. Crunk is something that isn't really around today and more so evolved into trap metal, which is arguably just a little less of a dumb version of the same thing. But this still has its place. I must mention a deluxe track once more before we put this album into its place, and that is the song Moist. Yeah, it's about what you think, and honestly, Lil Jon needs to be on a list right next to Kid Cudi of people who should never be allowed to talk about sex. But also, was this just before the era of people saying that moist is the worst word ever? Because I feel like I've been hearing that my whole life. People's least favorite word is moist. In fact, I probably have some people cringing right now saying the title of this song multiple times. And yet, it just threw that out there. I swear it's always been a thing, but maybe not. You know, something's dated. And that's kind of what I love about it. It's gonna go into B tier because I just kind of fuck with it a lot. And the next one up is much more tame, but also somewhat in a rap direction. We got Taio Cruz with Rockstarer.
This club, we gon' go all night. We gon' light it up like it's dynamite.
Now, I owe this album a lot because Dynamite was the first song I ever liked. Something about it just really activated the music side of my brain when I was but a child. Before that, I liked some songs technically, but like nothing that I loved and wanted to repeat over and over again. That song and Break Your Heart are absolutely undeniable classics of this era, but it really feels like Taio is sort of a two-hit wonder with those two tracks. The track list to this album is absolutely fucked depending on where you look, so sometimes Dynamite isn't even on it. So many songs don't cross over depending on what version you look at, whether it's a deluxe or not. I had to look up Only You on YouTube to find it instead of streaming, and it brought me so much nostalgia to see it with lyrics plus download link in the title. Only early YouTube, man. I was very surprised to see just how many songs on here are slow, sappy, sentimental love songs. I didn't really expect that, even if they're competent technically. Some of the deep cut bangers like Dirty Picture with Kesha I think are very good, but the album is very mixed results as a whole, and I think the deep cuts aren't really worth listening to. I ended up disappointed because there's only a few songs that have the same type of song that you'd expect from tracks like Dynamite, and I just wanted more bangers in here, dude. So two undeniable classics. I technically owe this album a lot. I gotta save it from the D tier, and it's technically all competent, so C is fine. But next, let's wrap up and round off the rap-centric part of the video, and let's talk about someone whose name spells out Florida if you take the space out. Just so oddly clever. Why does no one notice that? It's fucking awesome for no reason. Flo Rida, Wild Ones.
Whistle, baby, whistle, baby. Here we go.
So this one mostly lands on here for one particular song that's almost definitely just about a blowjob. A song about a blowjob that my local radio station particularly loved a whole lot. That, of course, being Whistle. The actual Whistle sample here is iconic. The chorus is super catchy. As for this combination of pop and hip-hop that we were seeing at the time, it's pretty undeniable. It's such a good way to start off this listen and really put a smile on my face hearing it again after a lot of years. Just like some of the Bob songs did. I get it's topically, lyrically not great, but I don't care. The following three are actually also pretty memorable, pretty big singles. I didn't recognize them based on name alone, but it was like a, oh yeah, I remember this one type of thing. Wild Ones might have actually been the bigger and more inescapable track than Whistle at one point in time. And not saying a ton, but it might be my favorite Sia performance with her feature here. All four songs here are very of the era, having optimistic lyrics about partying all night and really big, memorable choruses, very amped up, hyped up stuff here. It's a ton of fun in just the right way, and that's what we're searching for here. I'm not going to pretend I have any idea why most people hate Let It Roll, honestly. I think it's a pretty fun song. Later on the album, there's I Cry, which is probably Flo Rida's most celebrated and fondly remembered song at this point, and it's very fun and very explosive of a pop rap song. Given its title, it is shocking just how optimistic and bright the song is. Of course, that's Recession pop, name of the game. But I don't remember this one even after listening to it, so I was expecting this to be a slow down emotional moment in the album. Thankfully, it's not, because usually, with every example we've seen so far, that pretty much goes terribly. There is no slow moment on Wild Ones, and honestly, that is absolutely fine. It's also exactly what we're looking for here. There are 3 deep cuts I haven't mentioned that aren't nearly as good, but they don't feel like terrible, irrelevant deep cuts like so many of the albums here have, and they're pretty few and far between. This is a pretty short listen, all things considered. Features on those include J-Lo and Redfoo of LMFAO, because, of course, this whole universe is somehow interconnected entirely, and honestly, these remaining 3 tracks are dumb fun songs that aren't even hard to put up with. And Redfoo on his verse says she wants to be my Yoko Ono, which means he's comparing himself to John Lennon. So you have to love that much at least. But all around it's pretty dated, it's not exactly the greatest by today's standards, but it's got the bangers. We gotta put it at B tier. And next up, we're moving on to David Guetta, One Love.
That would be the best therapy for me. Hey, hey.
This is one very similar to the Taio Cruz album, where tracking down the songs in the original track list with all of the songs there and none of the deluxe tracks present feels practically impossible, but you can find like 5 different versions of the album depending on where you look, sometimes with entirely different cover arts, etc. Regardless, I'm sure he needs very little introduction, given his obnoxious Eiffel 65 Blue remix thing that's been so popular the last couple years, but David Guetta is different than anyone else we've talked about today because he's just a producer rather than a vocalist. I was going to say he's the DJ Khaled of his time, but from what I understand, he actually does something. So maybe he's more of a tacky electropop Metro Boomin, because David Guetta is the only one on the instrumental end, and there are popular features on every track. It's sort of like the Metro albums also, because it's naturally going to be a very mixed bag depending on the features. But this isn't 2020's trap. This is 2009, motherfucker. We're putting the good shit right at the start, and the following hour is gonna suck ass. The opener, When Love Takes Over, is a pretty solid pop track, and one I remembered from this era. Very competent and pretty well liked as a whole. The second track is alright, and then there's Sexy Bitch with Akon. If you didn't guess, this lyrically hasn't aged the best, and it's aged pretty cheesy sonically, but it's still admittedly a big banger nonetheless. There's then Memories with Kid Cudi, which is the most remarkable instance of Kid Cudi in an electronic and pop space, actually working pretty well. He tried it several times, including the worst song on Man on the Moon 2, and usually it sounded kind of bad, so it's cool to see that he actually can pull it off and it's actually working here. And that leaves us with 11 tracks remaining, and holy shit, it is a minefield. And even the space around the landmines is pretty uninspired and boring. Most of said landmines happen to have will.i.am's name attached to them. Who would have guessed? The first is on track 5, On the Dance Floor, which happens to be one of the most dated and corny EDM tracks I've ever heard. And then there's a remix, an absolutely terrible remix at that, of I've Got a Feeling. So congrats, you totally ruined one of the best Black Eyed Peas songs easily, and the only one from that album that I actually like. And then there's I Wanna Go Crazy. Holy shit, what the fuck happened there? On this track, it sounds like will.i.am is doing his best Rob Zombie impression, I shit you not, and it has some of the worst lyrics I've ever heard on a song. For the sake of the algorithm, I won't repeat them here, but go and listen and come back real quick. I'll wait. Okay, you back? Yeah, that's pretty bad, right? Otherwise, among the 11 tracks here remaining, it is mostly just tacky, bland, boring EDM, dance pop, and electropop, which has some of the themes of recession pop, but not really any of the charm or personality. And as a whole, this listen might have felt the most like a waste of time out of anything that I listened to today, even if it wasn't the most boring, just because it is one of the longest albums on this whole list. And despite the fact that there are some pretty competent songs on it and a few very nice, memorable ones. So yeah, dude, D tier. Some of the songs aren't D tier for sure, but take those ones and run far away. But before we take a big jump forward in time about 15 years or so, let's go ahead and end off the early recession pop era with a bang and talk about contender for the best album we talk about today. You know it, you love it.
It's Britney, bitch.
Especially given the more recent outcry of support that she received for rather unfortunate circumstances, it feels like Britney Spears is one of the most fondly appreciated 2000s and 2010s pop stars. And honestly, dude, she deserves it. She has some of the most iconic pop hits of the century so far. And while many of those biggest hits land on other albums, Blackout somehow manages to still be her best album. Not by much, but this is the album that is the oldest in the video, just barely edging itself into the recession pop era, but it sounds the newest out of anything we've talked about so far, and it has aged so well. Even the parts that haven't aged the best, such as this robot voice bit,
And I need you to understand that I
or some of the electronics heavy parts of the production, sound ahead of their time to an extent, just aren't necessarily in fashion now. Even though acts like LMFAO were explicitly making music for the club with hard, banging beats, nothing else we've talked about today bangs just as much as some of even the weakest tracks on Blackout. I was certain Pharrell Williams must have been behind Gimme More, given the little 4-count thing in the beginning of the song, but oddly enough, not him. However, the Neptunes did produce a different track later in the album, so we did still play a role on this album to an extent. Point is, if a track is good enough to sound like Pharrell when it isn't him, and then the same album actually has work from him later on, it's a pretty good indicator that shit sounds nice. The actual album experience of Blackout also feels a lot better than something like Animal, or especially something like One Love, because it isn't quite so top heavy and it isn't very long either. From what I understand, the first 2 tracks were definitely the biggest hits, but what's different here is that every song sounds like it had potential to be one of the biggest hits. This album doesn't have a peacock, a dinosaur, or any other animal related stinker for that matter. It's just crisp, nice, refined, sugary sweet, but still hard-hitting pop, start to end. This also goes without saying, but Britney is a great performer, and while most of the songs don't really have a lot of depth in the lyrics, Piece of Me surely does, and that's not the only one. I feel like I should have more to say about Blackout, or be able to dig into some more specifics, but the point really is here that it's just really fucking good. I almost went with her album Circus for this video, since the title track alone lends itself a little bit more to the Recession pop era template that we're working with, but that one's about as much of a mixed bag as anything else I've talked about today, and I have a feeling this ugly little name in the credits has something to do with that. So really I just wanted to talk about another album that's particularly good in this video. And maybe it's an unfair matchup, considering everything else we're working with is more of the time, but up there right up alongside Gaga, this is what I'd say out of things that are in this early era I would actually want to come back to and will be coming back to. Easy S tier. And with the 2007 to 2011 Recession pop era out of the way, let's see what the modern revival has to offer for us. Starting off with Charli XCX, Brat. This is where we'll start with what is mentioned in the beginning of the video, being interpreted as the Recession pop revitalization, and damn, we sure are starting off on a bang. The cultural splash alone of Brat is one that will be remembered for the foreseeable future, and likely as long as my generation is alive to call back to it. It starts before the album even came out, with the unveiling of the cover art, which had entirely mixed reaction for obvious reasons, but was easy to replicate, and everyone from brands to politicians to everyday people were recreating it as their profile picture if they were excited for the album. Myself included. I had one that said Aux. It's awesome. It's become so iconic now, and this odd shade of lime green that was used is the last color you would have predicted to see everywhere in the summer of 2024, but as that summer became known as Brat Summer, you saw it everywhere nonetheless. This is a fun-loving, party-centric, loud cultural splash, and it truly feels right at home in the Recession pop type ethos. The comparisons are far from stopping at the cultural splash it made, however, as the music itself sounds like a conscious and intentional callback to the synth pop stylings and the upbeat pop we saw in the early 2010s and late 2000s. While certainly a bit more hyper-pop influence, tracks like Von Dutch, Apple, or Mean Girls have a similar synth-heavy production and big anthemic chorus. Then there's moments like Club Classics, Rewind, or 365 that feel like a farther exaggerated version of the sounds that were popular at the time, almost a loving parody of it in a way, if that makes any sense. And that's before you tap into the album's more personal, vulnerable, and emotional side with a legitimate amount of depth. It's certainly something that was attempted on older albums that we've talked about, but it's never been executed this well by far. Overall, Brat is a more complex take on the Recession pop we've talked about before, but at this point in time, I feel like the pop album experience, and really pop music in general, has just gotten a lot more depth since the early 2010s, so it'd make a lot more sense for this Recession pop revival to be something with more depth that hits in that way. If we're gonna have a recession, at least we got the fun part. That's exactly what Brat is here to do. Easy S tier, one of the most iconic ones. And speaking of stuff that's pretty iconic, let's talk about Chappell Roan, Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess.
My kink is watching you run your life, you losing your mind.
If you are someone who religiously keeps up on new music releases, then you'll already know this, but this album actually came out well before the one we just talked about, and that really goes to show what a unique moment of overnight stardom Chappell Roan has really had so far, and how unexpected it was given the release time of this album. Yeah, it came out all the way back in October of 2023, and I feel like most of us can relate here in that I didn't know much at all about Chappell Roan until around the summer of 2024. And in that way, this album, and especially its biggest hits, really feel like a big part of the Recession pop revival that we've noticed as of late. It kind of needed its time, and it needed to be in the right era for this to blow up. Listening to said big hits, it also largely emphasizes just how much this style of music is back. Especially Hot to Go, Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl, and even to an extent After Midnight or Red Wine Supernova really feel like they have that same DNA as the Katy Perry or Kesha hits we've already talked about. There's something so anthemic about the album in general, and to say Chappell knows her way around a good hook would be an understatement. What especially stood out to me when listening to this album, though, is that you do often see her going into something slow on the emotional, deeper cuts, which of course is something we can also say about many of the earlier albums, Kesha's album for example. The difference here is just how much better it works. For example, put Picture You up against something like Not Like the Movies by Katy Perry, or put Casual against fucking Stefan, and you'll see what era has the better slow songs for filler, and what era has the slow songs for legitimate emotional depth. Honestly though, the best moments on The Rise and Fall are the moments that kind of meet in the middle of slow, sad, crying songs and big party bangers. I'm very partial to My Kink is Karma personally, because I'm just toxic like that, I guess, but also what might be the biggest song on the album, Pink Pony Club, which lands somewhere in that realm. There's also the fact that that song, and really multiple on this album, have become big anthems for LGBTQ and feminist movements. Considering that type of reaction, it really feels like we're looking at history not repeating, but rhyming. With the music on here in general, there's just not a lot of misses whatsoever. I'm not sold on every single moment, such as the chorus of Feminine Nomenon, but this one is one of the best albums we've looked at today. It's going in an A tier. You know, maybe it didn't need to have as many tracks as it did. Maybe there's some moments that aren't perfect, but it has some of the best songs we've talked about today. Alright, and let's move on to something we can say none of the same about, Jojo Siwa, Guilty Pleasure. Yeah, I can't let our generation get away with only having good shit. We gotta slide in some hot garbage from the modern era too, just to balance things out. Jojo Siwa has spoken about being inspired by artists like Bangers era Miley Cyrus and Lady Gaga, so it makes sense that the music she's making right now would fit in decently aesthetically. That being said, it's kind of more like the people she bought the songs from were inspired by those artists, because as I love to point out, Jojo didn't even write or in any way create Karma, or most of the songs on here from what I understand. This is more a collection of covers than an original work, and for that reason I'm unashamed to admit this. Choose Your Fighter isn't even a half bad song, and look up the original version if you want to see what I mean. But this speaks to the odd slant everything gets with the TikTokification of pop music in recent years. That's what these songs were made for, whether or not they're revitalizing an old sound. And we could be here all day breaking down the entire drama of Karma, its dance, its music video, etc. But instead, we'll go ahead and slide this EP into the bottom and move right along. And finally, we're going to close it off with Lady Gaga, Mayhem. The latest entry in the list here is one from just a couple months ago, and for that reason, I talked about it quite a bit in a different video already, where I ranked all of the albums that came out in March, so we'll keep this brief here. All things considered, it pretty much just is, in a sense, the revivalism of recession pop that we would be seeing as Gaga's long-awaited return. A return that sounds much more like the era than anything we've spoken about that is modern today, and sounds much more recession pop than anything Gaga has made in over a decade. We have the nonsensical but very catchy choruses on a track like Abracadabra, the fun, catchy, anthemic choruses and production style all throughout, and And unfortunately, we also see the front-loadedness that was pretty common, as my main critique of this album is that it just more or less gets worse with every track that passes, excluding the single that closes it off, Die With A Smile. That may sound harsh, but really even the 13th and, in my opinion, worst, second to last track on the album, Blade of Grass, is more worth listening to than the entirety of some albums we've talked about in this video. There's also songs like Love Drug and Zombie Boy that feel like proper early era Lady Gaga songs and are more than worthwhile to listen to, despite not quite living up to the absolutely electric singles that are at the start, like Disease. We're at a point where the arguable leader of the recession pop era is back at it once again, with music that sounds extremely reminiscent of the era, and her older stuff is definitely better much of the time, but this still holds up to much of it, especially on the best tracks, so we're going to go ahead and slide into a B tier, call it a day. So some quick ending notes to close on here. Some have categorized Sabrina Carpenter's Short and Sweet as part of the recession pop revival, and I can see where they might be coming from with that, but it just doesn't feel stylistically similar enough at all to me. There's folk / singer-songwriter types of songs on this album, and there's not really much you could play at the club. Maybe espresso hits, but otherwise it's not turn-up music in the slightest, or enough for me to consider putting it on here. If she embraces bigger choruses and more electronic leaning production in the future, she could totally become a part of this. I think she's vocally kind of just right for it, but for now, I'm not seeing it. Katy Perry's 143 from last year, however, does fit the bill of recession pop, but it's also hot fucking garbage, and I talked about Katy Perry once in this video, so I decided to cut that. It's a D tier if we put it anywhere. Considering the new music podcast and the 2 lists that I ended up putting it on for the year end of 2024, I've certainly talked about it enough as well. And if you need more evidence of this revival and the fact that it's going to be ongoing, just take a look at what new is coming out in the coming months. Lorde didn't end up on this list in the previous era because her album Pure Heroin was a little past the proper timeline, and it was really more of a response to recession pop, if anything. But her new single kind of sounds like it could fit in just fine, and that leads me to believe that her upcoming album might too. And you also, of course, have Kesha dropping her album in about a month from now, I believe, called Period. And if the singles are any evidence, this might be the most recession pop album we'll see since the actual original era, which just makes sense for Kesha, let's be real here. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting, so if I am, make sure to let me know in the comments below, and also let me know what you think of the revival of recession pop. Let me know what your favorite album in this video is, and let me know how wrong all of my opinions are. Also, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more music-related content coming your way, and I will see you in the next video.